Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Words into Action session. It is a pleasure to have you today for this very important event, particularly on the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Thank you very much for gathering, and we have a very exciting agenda ahead of us. On behalf of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, I warmly welcome you to this Words into Action session on National Disaster Risk Assessment. Today's discussion connects the African region deeply affected by natural disasters, yet rich in community resilience. Our shared goal is to strengthen inclusive, evidence-based disaster risk governance through the NDRA process and the Words into Action guidance. I am joined here with a group of distinguished panelists ranging from UN agencies, academia, and government authorities in charge of disaster risk reduction. The agenda will start with a brief welcoming remarks from the two heads of agencies from the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, followed by an introduction to the National Disaster Risk Assessment guidance provided by our colleague from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mr. Adam Fish. Finally, this will lead into a wonderful expert panel guided by Ms. Iwoma Nanjimas, the CIFAL Director of Nigeria, and end with a tutorial on how to access the Words into Action course provided by UNITAR. Thank you very much, and we will then start with the opening remarks from the two heads of agencies.
Greetings and a very warm welcome. I'm Kamal Kishore, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and the head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. It is both an honor and a pleasure to welcome you to this online training organized in collaboration with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Before you begin this training, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to each one of you for being here. Disasters do more than devastate lives. They displace communities, strain economies, disrupt development, damage the environment, and deepen humanitarian crises. In today's world, where risks are increasingly complex and interconnected, the responsibility to reduce disaster risk must be shared by all. This means not only those already working in disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation, but also humanitarian actors, development planners, environmentalists, and non-governmental stakeholders, including businesses and civil society. And the first step to reducing risk is understanding risk. This is foundational to guiding all other planning efforts. That is the purpose of our updated Words into Action guide on conducting national disaster risk assessments. The guide was designed to be inclusive and adaptable. No matter your level of expertise or background, its modular structure allows you to use it in a way that suits your needs. And this training will demonstrate when and how you can use the different processes backed by examples and case studies. Moreover, the principles and processes in the guide can be applied in different contexts, including at the subnational and local levels. I thank you again for undertaking this training and commend you on your commitment to disaster risk reduction. Working together across disciplines and sectors, we can stop hazards from becoming disasters and protect people, planet, and prosperity. Thank you.
Distinguished colleagues and partners, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Words into Action online sessions and to thank you for joining us in this learning journey, which will culminate on the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction on the 13th of October. The online training package on the National Disaster Risk Assessment Guidance, which we launch on this occasion, is designed to help national authorities understand and manage disaster risk in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and to develop and institutionalize their own national frameworks for action. This joint initiative of UNITAR and UNDRR fills a critical gap. Disasters are occurring with increasing frequency and intensity, bringing with them devastating human consequences and macroeconomic impacts. Direct annual losses globally exceed $200 billion. When cascading and ecosystem costs are considered, the total loss reaches an alarming $2.3 trillion. Understanding risks, taking action to avoid or mitigate them, and building resilience is a humanitarian imperative. It is also fundamental to achieve sustainable development. The dramatic human and economic consequences challenge every nation to move beyond rhetoric to manage the risks we face before they crystallize into tragedy, emphasizing inclusivity, governance, and decision-making based on science and evidence. This new suite of e-learning courses offered by UNITAR and UNDRR will provide guidance and practical tools for national authorities and UN country teams to develop detailed disaster risk assessment plans aligned with national governance frameworks. It will also provide practical, step-by-step tools to develop strategies for engaging stakeholders, which is essential for implementation and long-term success. A key objective is to strengthen the capacities of those responsible for disaster risk assessments to apply risk analytics, gather relevant data, evaluate, and prioritize risk drivers to design actionable management strategies. In just 2.5 hours, you will learn about the key components of the National Disaster Risk Assessment process, including governance management and policy, getting the right leadership and structures in place for effective risk reduction, risk analysis, to understand risk drivers and develop actionable strategies, and risk analytics, to gather and manage relevant data to calculate risks and its magnitude. During these live sessions, our expert facilitators will guide you through practical exercises tailored to specific sectors and regional contexts. Together, we will identify risks, map stakeholders, define success indicators, and outline what processes and systems are needed to support risk reduction plans. Our teams will also guide you through the full online training package that includes 3 complementary self-paced courses on how to mainstream risk analysis into common country assessments, cooperation frameworks, and humanitarian program cycles. I wish you success in these sessions and invite you to cascade these courses across your networks and turn the promise of the Sendai framework into concrete protection for our economies and our communities.
Thank you for listening to these excellent welcoming remarks, and we will now begin with our next session. Up next, we will be having an introduction to the National Disaster Risk Assessment Guidance provided by our excellent colleague, Mr. Adam Fish. He is the Program Manager Officer for the Risk Analysis and Reporting Unit of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Please allow me to provide a brief overview of Mr. Adam Fish before we move into the next section. Mr. Adam Fish is the Program Management Officer for the Risk Analysis and Reporting Unit. He is the coordinator of the Global Risk Assessment Framework and part lead author in the Global Risk Assessment Framework and overall coordinator for the Special Report on Drought. Previously, he worked in the UNDRR's regional office in Africa for program delivery, among several other cross-sector collaborations. He has an expertise in emergency response, risk assessment, and academic pursuits. With this, thank you very much, and I will now pass the floor to Mr. Adam Fish.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for having me today. It's a special day, as you heard, because it is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, IDDR. So it's a UNDRR birthday and a special day for many people working in disaster management, disaster risk reduction. As Lauren said, my name is Adam Fish. I work for UNDRR. I used to have the pleasure of working in our regional office in Africa, which means that I have visited both of the beautiful countries indicated here that are hosting this one. I had the pleasure in 2017 to go to Nigeria and 2018 to go to Gambia, and I was very charmed by both. I'm very happy to see you again. And greetings again if I saw you when I was there last time. I wanted to talk to you about the new Words into Action guidelines on national disaster risk assessment that we've just finished and launched globally at the global platform earlier this year. These guidelines are part of UNDRR's overall delivery to member states. We're a very small UN organization, a secretariat organization. We don't have a lot of operational feet on the ground. But what we can do is provide what member states ask us for, which is usually guidance, tools, software, and normative support. And these Words into Action guidelines are one of those resources. What they're meant to do is not be an academic publication, but really a practical guide for how to do things that are associated with how to reduce disaster risk. So you can see a handful of guides that we've published here in the past, including design and conduct of simulation exercises. And this is a how-to guide or nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction or engaging children and youth. All of these kinds of things have been asked for by member states. We consolidate global experts to help us bring global best practice and try to put together documents and guidance that are concrete and tangible and implementable by people like disaster management agencies. But not only. So what we've recently done is produce the new National Disaster Risk Assessment guidance. This is an update from one that we did in 2017. The new guidance, can I chat at the same time? Here, I got this in the chat. I'll send you a link to the new guidance. The new guidance is an update of the 2017 guidance. It is still aligned with the Sendai framework, of course, but this is meant to be used at both national and subnational levels. So even though it says national in the title, this is something that is meant to be very flexible and adaptable and for the use of stakeholders. And the idea behind it is that everybody who's doing a risk assessment is trying to make things more stable, more safe, more sustainable. And that includes, yes, national planners, ministries and sectors, but also subnational regions, provinces or regions or states. It could be municipalities, it could be villages. The processes are similar. The ways that you do it, the stakeholders may be different, the scale may be different, but the processes are very similar. So what we tried to do is put together a guidance that makes it easy for people to see themselves in the guidance and apply the parts that are useful to them. So it's very adaptable, it's very user-focused, and the structure of it is that there's a singular guidance, a sort of a main text that is the overarching walkthrough. It describes from A to Z all of the steps to do a risk assessment. And the real value of it, though, is that there are 20 annexes. And the annexes are, I think of them as a choose your own adventure. And the idea is that you don't need to start with A and then go to B and then go to C, because they all do different things and they're all meant to help with different aspects of doing a good risk assessment. So the idea is that you figure out what it is that you're trying to protect, what exposure you're trying to protect, whether it's the agriculture sector in general or transportation in the agriculture sector or markets or children going to school. Different things that we're trying to protect have different requirements for risk assessment and different ways of communicating and engaging with stakeholders. So the idea is that you start with your starting point. What is it that you're trying to protect? What is it that you're worried about? So that you then apply those annexes, those processes that you need help with. Overall, the guidance is structured into three broad stages. The first is understanding the governance, management, and policy foundations. So is there a national law or a regional law or a sector strategy or a village plan that guides this kind of thing? Who are the stakeholders and what are their capabilities? If you're dealing at a national level, you're dealing with probably disaster management and civil protection and the full power of the state. If you're at a village level, you're dealing with very different kinds of stakeholders and capacities, not less, but more specific. What can we do to ensure good inclusion, participation, and accountability? So that's sort of on the structural side in stage one. Stage two is the meat of it. This is the middle of the sandwich. And this is, what data do we need? What data is available? Do we have access to it? Do we have the capacity or systems to process it and use it? And then how to do the risk assessment, how to choose the right method for the risks that we're facing. And then lastly, applying the results. So you don't do a risk assessment and then staple it and put it on the shelf and go back to whatever you were doing. It's meant to inform policy. It's meant to inform action. So making sure that what you do from the first two stages has applicability, that there are ways to communicate the results. And as you can see, we think that this is applicable for things like DRR and climate change adaptation programming, policies, NAPs, risk finance, preparedness, early warnings, anticipatory action, response, recovery, contingency planning. You need to understand the base of risk to be able to do all of these things. Now, as I said, there are 20 annexes. These start from the dark blue ones at the bottom of the page, working up to the top. And those are the three stages that I mentioned. But each of them covers a process associated with doing a good risk assessment. Now, as I said, you don't start from A and go to B and go to C and go to D, because probably you already know who the people and critical systems are that you're going to be worrying about. So you have a technical scope, you understand what it is that you're worried about, but maybe you haven't got operational guidance and a policy framework for the roles and responsibilities of the risk assessment. Or maybe you're missing the data sets. So you sort of pick the lines that help you to meet the needs of your risk assessment so that you're doing something that suits your purposes. It's not for me and it's not for my pleasure. It's something that's really meant to serve your risk assessment needs. I'm not going to go through each of these lines, but as you can see, these are all sort of meant to step up to the point where you have a complete, comprehensive system where the gaps that you may have, you have the support to fill them in. The idea behind this is that it serves the interests of multiple contexts and it's very adaptable. So if you are managing this at a community level, you're in a village or you're in a like a valley, for example, or a particular region, you need a risk assessment that helps to inform evacuation plans, community services, and make sure that the supports in the community are adapted to the hazards. In that case, you're probably looking for an all hazards approach. You want a very human-centered and human health, maybe damage to personal assets, protection profile. But the process is the same as if you were doing a sectoral one. You need a risk assessment because agriculture is the backbone of the economy and the sustainability, and you need to manage the risk from droughts and storms and floods. The processes are same. The idea is that you apply the processes inside those annexes in an individualized and contextual way that helps you to serve the needs that you're trying to face. Maybe I'll stop there, Lauren, and turn over to the panel. Thanks very much for having me again.
Thank you, Adam, for the very comprehensive overview. Yes, certainly. And with this, we will now move on to our next session. We now are pleased to welcome an expert panel led by our wonderful directors, Mr. Christopher Belford and Ms. Iwoma Nenjemez. Before we move into the panel, it's my pleasure to introduce the two directors. First, we have Dr. Christopher Belford from CIFAL Banjul, The Gambia. Dr. Christopher Belford currently serves as the director of CIFAL Banjul, the first UNDRR-affiliated center in the Gambia, hosted by the University of the Gambia, where he also holds a position of Associate Fellow of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Dr. Christopher Belford is also an Associate Professor in Economics at the University of the Gambia, with expertise in economic development, climate change economics, international trade, and economic policy analysis in developing countries. Dr. Belford is actively involved in national capacity building initiatives and serves on advisory boards and committees focused on policy research, entrepreneurship, and stakeholder engagement. His work contributes to bridging academic research with public policy and sustainable development practice in West Africa. Our second director is Ms. Iwoma Nenjemez of CIFAL Nigeria, based in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. Ms. Iwoma Nenjemez is the director of CIFAL Nigeria, based in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, with the River States University. She has over 14 years of experience in program management. She has spearheaded numerous projects focused on technical skills development for youth, capacity building for civil service administration, and livelihood development training for women and girls affected by oil mining and pollution in the Niger Delta region. In addition to her leadership role, Ms. Nenjemez is a fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Humanitarian Studies and Social Development based in Nigeria. I now pass the floor to our expert moderator, Ms. Iwoma Nenjemez, to continue with introducing our guest speakers.
Thank you, Lauren, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for welcoming me. I welcome all the panelists, all who joined this wonderful program. We'll go straight to the panel session. And this afternoon, we have two panelists, one from the Rivers State University and the other from the Gambia. So I would like to, first of all, introduce us to the objectives of this panel session. This expert panel session will focus on key dimensions of disaster risk assessment aligned with the NDRA guidance, including the national status comparison, priority areas for risk analysis, methodologies and decision support mechanisms, root cause and forensic risk analysis, communication of assessment results, city-level frameworks, and evolving risk landscape. We will begin the session with Ms. Mbasi Sane from the National Disaster Management Agency for the Gambia. Ms. Mbasi Sane currently serves as the Senior Program Officer at the National Disaster Management Agency for the Gambia. With over 16 years of experience in disaster management, risk reduction, and climate change programming, her expertise focuses on advancing resilience and disaster preparedness. Ms. Sane brings a wealth of expertise in disaster science, policy development, and strategic planning. Ms. Sane is also responsible for national stakeholder collaborations, engaging government officials and the UN system to develop disaster risk reduction policies and community resilience. So once more, I want to welcome Ms. Mbasi, and I hand the floor over to you, Ms. Mbasi, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And I will say also a happy International DRR Day from the Gambia. We are also celebrating IDDR Day today in the Gambia. Right now, my colleagues are downstairs commemorating the day. And it's a pleasure being with you also to present on what we have as a country. And I will also thank the previous presenters for that brilliant presentation. Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you so much. As you already said, I am Mbasi Sane, Senior Program Officer at the National Disaster Management Agency. This is the outline of the presentation. Give a quick overview of the country, NDMA at glance, the regional priorities, disaster analysis, the protocols and decision-making in terms of disasters, and then the hazard profiling in the country. Then first of all, I'll just give a quick geographic overview of the Gambia. Already, as we know, Gambia is situated in West Africa, surrounded by Senegal. And then the coverage of the country, it's 11,300 kilometers squares, and it's very small. And as the smallest country in the Gambia, as you can see in the map, sometimes it's difficult to see where Gambia is located. And the topography is low-lying landscape with an average elevation of 34 meters. High point Red Rock is 53 meter sea level rise. 10% of land area is river, and 20% consists of swamps and flood prone. Vulnerability, we have the coastal and the riverine zone that are mostly vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise. And we also have regional experiences at regional level. Mostly they have droughts causing the population to move to the urban areas. And then the ecological system also, despite the size, we have diverse ecological systems, including the mangrove forest, wetlands, swamps, woodlands, agricultural lands, and then marine and coastal ecology system. So these are a quick intro of the Gambia, and the demography, we are very small, as I said, 2.6 million that we have from the 2013 census. So the gender distribution, we have male and female equal, but then the majority are female. And then the age structure, we have a youth population age from 21.8 years. And then we have 35% under age 14, 36% between 25 to 54, and then 9% above 55. The total fertility rate is 3.8 children per woman. Urbanization is 63.9%. And then the urban, as I said, rapid development is affecting the city Banjul, and which is always having climate problems in this area. So the NDRA, that's the National Disaster Management Agency, was established by an act in 2008, where we have an act policy strategy. And then all this policy and strategies is in line with the international frameworks, from the Yogo frameworks to the Sendai framework. So the establishment of the agency is, we have the governing council that is chaired by the vice president as our head. And then we have the deputy executive, we have the executive director of the agency, and then we have the TAG, or the national platform for DRR. We have the governors and mayors at regional level, at municipality level. And then also we have regional coordinators in all these 8 administrative regions that we have. And then we also have regional disaster management coordinators, committee members. We have district chiefs as our head at district level. And then we have at village level, we also have the alcalos as the head. And then we also have regional district disaster management committees in all these districts also. And then to give a brief rundown of the policy, the vision is strengthening the coping capacity of people against all hazards. Mission is continuously build up the country's resilience to shock from natural and human induced. The objective is creating an integrated national capacity and strengthening local risk reduction. And so DRR is systematically integrated into policies and programs. And then also strengthening in integrated national disaster preparedness and response capacity at all levels. So the focus of the strategic or the policy is making sure disaster restoration is a development priority, improving early warning system, addressing priority development concerns. How do we going to reduce the underlying risk factors? It's already mentioned by the first presenter. We should do the risk assessment to be able to know those. And then effective disaster response to disaster preparedness. And then the regional priorities already in the Gambia, what we did hazard ranking per region to know each region what their problems are. So when you look at the presentation, Banjul as the capital, flooding is their main problem every year. KM also is having the same thing. Flooding is a problem. West Coast, we have windstorm problem. The lower river region, we have fire outbreaks as their problem. NBR, we have windstorm. The central river region, we have fire outbreaks. And the upper river region, we have windstorm. So based on this, we did an analysis or an assessment in each region, where each region developed their own contingency plan, did their own hazard mapping. So that's why we were able to identify, to know each region what their problems are. And this will better help us to prepare ourselves when it comes to policy development and how are we going to respond to them when they are affected. And this is just a summary of this year's dashboard, the disasters that happens from January to September. We have 578 households affected, 10,560 population are affected, but still assessment is still ongoing, but this is as of September data that we have received. And then you can look at the household head affected by gender, and then we have 32.18% that is female, and then we have 67.82% male. Population affected by gender, this one is at household level, and this one is looking at population level. So if you look at population affected by gender, we have male 5,903, and then we have female 4,657. And then the infants also are not left behind. This is the tool that we use to assess when disaster happens. And then they are also captured. You can look at it, the infant, male and female. and then household affected by region also. So if you look at the household affected by region, you can see that here, URR is the most affected by region when it comes to disasters, followed by CRR North. You have West Coast, North Bank region, KM, LRR, CRR South, and Banjul. And population affected by regions also, we do have that database to see, and then you can see from always URR, it seems this year we have the highest affected populations in the URR region. That's where the Basse end. And then we also have a population affected by hazards. So the highest is flooding on our dashboard, and then followed by domestic fire, windstorm, and other disaster related. So the internal displays, these are, and then you can see the internal displays, we have CRR North is having the highest, 1,135 people displaced based on the hazard that they have challenged with. And then we also have a population of internal displaced also per region. URR is the highest on our list. And then persons injured, CRR North, we have the highest, 30, yes, 30, we have 30 victims that are affected, and URR, we have 24, CRR North, we have LRR 1, we have KM4, NBR 7, and then CR West Coast 8, and then death recorded, we have 3. This death recorded, we have 2 of them from North Bank. The reason being is because the other one, the 2, I think they were suffered from the thunder, the lightning that suddenly killed them. And then we have the injured persons here also per region. And then we have URR still having the highest region, that number of persons injured there, and then followed by CRR North. These are all at regional level, the number of people affected, and then the type of hazard they are exposed with. And then you can also see the dashboard continues to tell us the shelter, because all these things, we need them, that will help in decision making and response also. So shelter damage by region also, we have still URR on the list is having the highest, and then followed by Banjul is always minimal because it's not that big also compared to other regions. And then you also have the water points that are also affected per region also. You can see that we have the regional CRR North this time is having the highest, because that region also, they are always challenged with water issues when it comes to that region. It's an area that is very dry, and they have challenge in terms of water and food insecurity also. And then sanitary facilities that are affected from this year also, you can see from our list here, we have URL is having the highest. That's 170 sanitary facilities are affected in that region, meaning then we have to do and see what are some of these problems causing all this in URL, because you can see when it comes to shelter, water points, and even people affected and sanitary, we always have the highest in URL. And then when it comes to decision making, that's the protocols that how we operate in the Gambia. This was an assessment that we did, that was 2022, when we have a serious flooding. The city was flooded, and then an intervention was done there. And we, through OSHA, we were able to conduct and came up with some analysis here. So decision making, as I mentioned from the first slide, that's the National Disaster Governing Council. That's where the vice president and the minister sits. And then when you have that, then you have the tactical groups. That's where the technicians sits at the NDMA, and then you have the operations at regional level, the regional coordinators. And then the vice president and the ministers and the NGOs, UN, and the private sector will be in this governing council. And then when it comes to crisis management, you have the NDMA office here, and then UNCT, that's there at UN system. They have, especially WFP is taking the lead in that in terms of humanitarian support, will be working with us. And then they have the NGOs or the Tango. NGOs are on the tangos. We have them working them, and then we also have NGO affairs also that are part of this group that we are working with. They are part of this decision making. So that's how decision comes from. So the problem will come from the regional level here, and it comes to the central office. The central office now will inform the office of the vice president at this level. So that's where if it exceeds and we need an emergency meeting, then the vice president will organize and call all these ministers and all these partners to this meeting. So that's how we operate at NDMA level. But notwithstanding, whilst the vice president also is coordinating with this minister, at NDMA level, agency level, we'll also call stakeholders meeting to inform them on the issue that is happening on. And then we will be giving that feedback to the office of the vice president, where he or she will also be giving feedback to these people here. And then also it continues again when we ask, or is similar to that one, but this one goes up to regional level. So you look at the regional level where they have the operations, and you come to, it goes to the regional offices, where we have the 7 regional coordinators. And then we come to NDMA, Director of Operations, now will be communicating. Now it's a communication going back and forth to all these sectors. And then when we get a disaster that happens from the regions, it comes straight to the Director of Operations here. Then the Director of Operations will communicate to the Executive Director. Then the Executive Director will relay the information to the Vice President. That's where the Vice President now will call a Governing Council meeting. A Governing Council that will now involve the NDMA Director, and then we call for other stakeholders to come for our emergency meetings to see how best we are going to handle the response that we have at hand. And this is the contingency plan already mentioned from the previous presentation. This is where we are able to identify to know what are the hazards that we have in the country and in each region. This was the picture that we are seeing was the 2022 flood that's happened in Banjul. This is the capital city of Banjul. That was almost all flooded. So we develop a contingency plan from that immediate, because we had another one, then we have to review and then see what are some of the causes of this happening in Banjul. So the objective is to reduce the maximum extent possible to advance the impact of the anticipated disaster on the affected population, and so when required, humanitarian response is effective, and how are we going to coordinate within ourselves when it comes to response to avoid that duplication and delay when it comes to response. So from our contingency plan, these are the hazards it ranks. Flooding and windstorm is the highest that we have on the chart. We have fire, domestic and bushfire that we have. Epidemic also we have, drought and pest infestation. But then these two are the key ones that we are year in, year out, the country is challenged with, from central to regional level. And then this one is the hazard profile for each region. Then we conducted hotspots mapping in all the regions. So, and then in each regions, we identify a community, because those communities are every year, they are affected either by flooding or by fire. So in Banjul, we realized that these 2 streets in Banjul, Tobacco Road and Afdai, are the hotspots. These are the hotspots in Banjul. So when it comes to North Bank region, Farafenye Bara, Pakao Nyogu is a hotspot, Ndungu Kebe and Mbapaba. And then when it comes to KM, we have Bundung Kakuna, Ibo Town, Abuko, and Pakao. These are hotspots for us. Every year we'll have problem in these communities. West Coast, we have Nemakunku, Brikama Jambarsane, Jida Babanjai, and Lamen. LRR, we have Swama, Pakalinding, Jifarong, Kuinala, Nyakunda. Sierra, we have Bansang, Kuntau, Wafta. URR, we have Kabakama, Sareboyo, Samba. So these are some of the communities that we identify as hotspots areas in the Gambia, and every year they will flood it. As in the map here, you can see, I don't know whether it's very tiny, but that's why I brought this thing here so that we will be able to, the map is just illustrating as it is on this one, showing where the communities are located in the map. So this is what we have in the Gambia. And these are some of the areas that we are challenged with, especially when it comes to response to disasters in the community. So it's brief, but because of time, I'm just able to summarize this. And thank you so much for your time. And then the questions are open. If anything has anything to contribute or you want anything to be clarified, I'm ready to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Sane. That was very comprehensive, and thank you for the comprehensive work you've done. We appreciate it. Now we will move to our next panelist, Dr. Williams Onwebu of the Rivers State University. Dr. Williams Chinedu Onwebu is a lecturer at the Institute of Geosciences and Environmental Management at the Rivers State University in Port Harcourt. Dr. Onwebu brings a range of experiences in disaster risk management, ranging from mitigation, response, relief, and recovery. He is also a member of the International Conference Planning Committee on Disaster Reduction and Environmental Risk Management, providing technical and scholarly research in shaping policy. His work contributes to building resilience and sustainable practices in vulnerable regions, particularly in the Niger Delta, where the Rivers State University is located. So please welcome Dr. Williams Onwebu as he presents his paper to us. Thank you.
The topic, community-led disaster risk reduction plans, seasonal flooding, protection of vulnerable communities, infrastructure resilience. And I'm going to use Nigeria as a case study. Nigeria is at risk of flooding. Flooding is one identified hazard in our community and society that has destroyed lives and properties in very high magnitude. So it is a very important hazard here. So when it starts, it gets a lot of places flooded and submerged. So it is a matter of very important discourse. Now, looking at what we have here, disaster risk reduction, what are we talking about? We're talking about a systematic identification, assessing and managing the causes of disasters to prevent them from new risks and reduce existing ones. It aims at minimizing the impact of hazards through actions like reducing exposure to risk, lowering vulnerability, managing lands and environment, and improving preparedness and early warning. Now, for instance, it takes a community, because every community has a reasonable knowledge about the hazard. They know the hazard that they are at risk of. They also know the terrain that they are. So it takes a very reasonable reason for a community to be involved in all of that. So for you to reduce a particular hazard or to reduce a disaster, because it is when a hazard turns into a disaster that it becomes very vulnerable. The essence of all of this is to reduce vulnerability. Vulnerability on the people, vulnerability on environment, and vulnerability on the infrastructure. So looking at flood, because I'm coming to Nigerian context, that is the only flood that we're at risk of. So we're looking at that. So it involves a holistic involvement of the local people and everybody, because trying to manage or reduce that level of vulnerability it is not a one-man thing. It takes the government, it takes a collective responsibility of both the individuals and even the community members. So this reduction is something that has to do with too many persons coming together to ensure that the level of vulnerability is reduced. Then emphasizing on community participation. Community participation is essential for disaster risk reduction, DRR, because local communities have unique knowledge and can ensure solutions to relevant cases. So when communities are communities are participated or they are involved in disaster risk reduction, it means they will contribute to their quota by ensuring that the local knowledge that they have will be brought into play. That way, it can be reduced. Now, looking at Nigeria as a case study, Nigerian disaster landscape is dominated by recurrent flooding, driven by a combination of heavy rain and the factors like poor urban planning, inadequate drainage systems, and the release of water from dams. Of course, Nigeria is one country that is very, very vulnerable to flood hazards because of our location. Nigeria is located close to two rivers, the Niger and the Banjul rivers. So when anything happens, it's those areas that are below are lying low. Those waterlogged areas will all be flooded. And as that happens, a lot of people will be vulnerable. People will be displaced from their homes. People will lose their lives. Properties will be damaged, and even houses will also be damaged. So what are the causes of this flooding? Now, looking at natural cause, when there's a heavy rainfall, heavy precipitation, you will now see that the water that is on the earth's surface, some will evaporate and some will infiltrate into the soil. The ones that are left on the earth's surface will move our surface runoff, carrying soil particles to where they will be deposited. So for instance, when the Lagoon Dam in Cameroon was released, it got everywhere flooded. That was sometime in 2020, you know. Then looking at the human factors, deforestation, land use management, and rapid unplanned urbanization. When we begin to deforest our forest, because ordinarily when there's a vegetation and there's a serious downpour in Nigeria, when the grasses are there, they will absorb the water. They will not allow the flow of water. But when all the forests are deforested, it means water will move. And of course, as as they are moving, they move to places. They move to places where they will get places flooded, and even our houses will be disturbed. So sometimes when our drainages are blocked, with sediments, it means when water gets into the drainage, it cannot flow because water is supposed to flow downward slope, ensuring that it doesn't get anywhere flooded. So, but when it's at the point where water is not moving the way it should move, places will be flooded. Now, looking at the geo-economic factors, poverty and lack of access to financial resources often force vulnerable populations to live in high-risk areas. You know, when people do not have enough financial resources or they don't have access to it, it will make them to live on unsafe terrains. So they can't afford to get properties or to acquire properties at safer places. So social economic factor is one of the causes of flooding too, because some people will go and start building houses on water plains. When they build water on floodplains, it means when flood comes, because definitely water will find its way. So when there's a rainfall and there's surface runoff, they will move and there won't be a way for them to go because there's no channels or way for them to move. It means they are all going to stay at those places because water will definitely find its way, like I said. So socioeconomic factor is one factor that is very important. Now, major flood events in Nigeria include severe floods in 2012, 2022, and the ongoing events in 2024 and 2025, with the 2012 flood being the worst in 40 years, displacing over 2.1 million people. The 2022 flood was also devastating, causing over 600 deaths and displacing more than 1.3 million people, while the 2024 flooding resulted in over 1,200 deaths and 1.8 million displacements. Recent events in 2025 have included a flood in May that killed at least 500 people in Mokwa and severe flooding in September that submerged parts of Maiduguri. Seasonal flooding in Nigeria. This is a regular occurrence, typically that happens between April and October, but its severity is worse due to climate change, poor drainage, and deforestation. The floods have led to significant loss of lives, widespread displacement, destruction of homes and farmlands, and have resulted to food insecurity. Now, climate change is increasing the frequency of intensity of rainfall, with annual rainfall amounts potential occurring in just a few months, catching people unprepared. Now, poor infrastructure, inadequate drainage systems, and unregulated construction, particularly building and waterway, contribute to flooding. In Nigeria, a lot of persons do not look at the infrastructure before they begin to even start. Most infrastructure are located or situated at floodplains, and even the drainage system that they already have there, it's not properly done. So, most ordinarily, if you're trying to construct a drain or drainages, you're supposed to slope them, not leave them at the same level, because of course, water will definitely move, considering the topography of the terrain. So when drainages are built on such a way that the water cannot move, before you know it, the drainage will be filled up and water will just begin to flow to where they can find their ways. Now, looking at dam failures, most of the dams, when they failed, for instance, the one that happened in 2024, a dam failed and caused catastrophic flooding. The impacts of this can lead to loss of lives. Floods have killed hundreds of persons in recent years, with actual death toll often higher than reported. Displacement of humans. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes due to flooding. Property and infrastructural damage. Flooding has destroyed thousands of homes, farms and bridges, and collapsed buildings too. Now, looking at vulnerable community and social impact. Now, what is vulnerability first? Let's get to understand what vulnerability means. Vulnerability is a measure of the propensity of any object, any human, any individual, any country, or any entity, or any other entity to incur the negative consequences of a hazard. Now, looking at vulnerable communities, let's talk about the people. A greater part of the population is more vulnerable than the other. Populations like children, women, the elderly, persons with disabilities, internally displaced persons face significant social impacts, including exclusion, marginalization, and lack of access to essential services like healthcare and education. You see, when this particular population, you now see that a lot of them do not get access to all of this. They are excluded. So some social impact of vulnerability communities. Let's look at exclusion and lack of representation. Women, youths, and the elderly, and even people with disabilities are often excluded from governance and the decision-making process, which results in their needs being overlooked in policy and resource allocation. You see, because the people are already vulnerable, when all of this policy making is considered, they are not considered, they are overlooked. So let's look at limited access to essential services. Of course, people who are dependent on critical infrastructures like those on wheelchair, those who are sick, children, sick ones, and all of that, they do not have access to essential services like healthcare, education, and clean water because of how vulnerable they have become. So let's talk about why are they vulnerable? Why are these people vulnerable? Because vulnerability, as it stands, it's a function of exposure. It is only when you're exposed to a hazard that you can be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you have become vulnerable because there's nothing anybody can do. Hazards will always come, disasters will always occur. You cannot stop them. You can only reduce them by way of trying to ensure that all of these measures are in place. Measures to prevent, measures to mitigate, measures to look at what people did and what the way they're supposed to do it rightly. So when all of these things are not there, it means you're open to vulnerability. So vulnerability is a function of exposure. In Nigeria, vulnerable to flooding due to a combination of factors, including geographical location, climate change, and human activities like poor urban planning and inadequate infrastructure. Nigeria is geographically located in place where they can always get flooded, because from the kind of rivers we have, like I mentioned earlier, when water overflow their banks, you will now see that they will get the other surrounding areas flooded because of the geographical location. Now, the geographical location and in fact, the proximity to major rivers. The country has major river systems such as Niger and Benue, and a lot of coastal lines, which makes area near these places more vulnerable because there are water bodies everywhere. So it is always possible for us, for the country, to be always vulnerable to flooding. Now, climate change. Climate change is the frequency and intensity of rainfall due to climate change. Heavy rainfall without climate change. Heavy rainfall can overwhelm natural and man-made drainages. Of course, without climate change, when the rain is heavy or when the level of precipitation is high, it is possible to overwhelm natural man-made drainage systems. And when overwhelmed, it is possible for any area to be flooded. Now, looking at community-led disaster risk reduction. Hello, are we there? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, but we'll be rounding up very soon.
Okay.
We are with you, but we please round up. We have a lot of interesting questions from our participants, so if we can round up, we'll get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Looking at community-led disaster risk reduction. Looking at community-led disaster risk reduction, we're talking about how the communities will come and be properly carried along so that they will now contribute to their quota, because every community has a primary understanding of a particular hazard. They are already aware because, of course, they know the terrain where they live. So if these communities are allowed to come and bring their local knowledge or idea on how they can face a particular hazard, it means when they are properly carried along and represented, it means the level of vulnerability will be low because the hazard will be reduced. So the impact is not going to be much. So the key principles of community-led risk reduction. One, community ownership and leadership. Communities are the drivers of passive resilience of their own disaster risk reduction efforts. Participatory approach. Community members are involved in every stage, ensuring that risks are understood and solutions are relevant to their specific context. Now, local knowledge and resources. This initiative harnesses local expertise, conditions, and resources, which are often overlooked by top-down approaches. Now, infrastructural resilience and long-term solution. This talks about strengthening infrastructure like riverbanks, drainage systems, and all of that. Ensuring that the kind of riverbanks that are there are built in such a way that they can defend flooding, building embankments that can defend flooding, and also building drainage systems that can allow water flow down to where they are needed. So how do we achieve this as a country? To upgrade
Dr.
the
Nebu,
building
please,
floor.
could you just take just 2 minutes, please, if you could just round up. We have some questions for our panelists. Thank you.
Okay. Looking at upgrade and flood-prone defenses to enhance the existence of river basin network by building or repairing embankments, flood barriers, and channels to manage water from or to divert water from other places. What this is trying to say is that let's build structures that can defend flooding so that areas and buildings and people don't get impacted. So when we do all of this, we have been able to reduce the level of resilience. So when we have done that, it means we have been able to reduce vulnerability. Because the whole essence of this whole thing, disaster risk reduction, is to reduce the level of vulnerability. That's the essence of saying all of this. Having said all of this, I've come to the end of this online class. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We appreciate your contribution and your exposure on the flooding situation in Nigeria, especially in the Niger Delta, that receives a lot of water from the upper parts of Nigeria. We will dive in immediately to the Q&A session, and we have received some questions from our panelists. For our panelists here, and Adam, you will also contribute to answering some of the questions. I will start with Lauren. Can I start with the Q&A now?
Yes, before we proceed, I would like to ask Mr. Adam Fish to provide a brief conclusion on how the topics relate to the NDRA guidances.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll go really quickly. I think a lot of the questions are for the representatives of Gambia and Nigeria anyway, so maybe I'll go very, very quickly on this. I really enjoyed the two presentations because I think they really highlighted some important elements about why you do a risk assessment. As Ms. Mbasi said, there is the organization structure. You know which hazards. You have a sense of the geography. You have a sense of the priorities of the country. You have a policy framework. You have basically, this is not a mystery. This is now a governance challenge. This is something that you have all of the foundational information. You remember when I was talking about the 3 phases of sort of having the background information, doing the risk assessment, and then applying the results. You have the whole first phase is finished. Like all, check, 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 check. You can tick all of the boxes because you've clearly articulated the entire problem is known. Now the next stage is figuring out what data do you need, what information do you need in order to protect those communities from fire in this region and flooding in that region. What resources do you have and how can you put them into action? I really appreciated that. In the case of Nigeria, there was a lot of focus on community knowledge, and I think this is fundamental. Communities know, and they have the experience of what has happened in their own context. So if you go to a community and say, you should watch out for flooding, they'll probably say, yeah, obviously, we've been living through it for 50 generations. We know that this area floods. We don't need a risk assessment to tell us that. We need to understand what to do about it, how to live, how to survive, how to protect our things. So I think that making sure to emphasize that community participation, inclusion, and paying attention, as you said, Professor, to the dynamics that are changing the context right now. You mentioned rapid unplanned urbanization. You made reference to the unknown effects of climate change. And I say unknown because it's not like we know that things are getting better. We know things are getting more challenging, less predictable, less the scales that we're used to are maybe not the same. We know that it's going to get harder. We just don't know how and in which ways. So you've already identified some of the challenges, and I think it's excellent. I really appreciated the emphasis on these community level, both at the community level and then the macro challenges that countries and communities are facing in understanding and managing risk. Maybe I'll stop there, Lauren, and turn over to the panel for the Q&A.
Thank you, and over to you, Ms. Nanjamaz.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Adam. Q&A. The first question we have for the panelists, and Adam, you can contribute, is how can we improve the coordination and integration between different levels of government and non-governmental organizations in disaster response? Or do I give all the questions and then you answer? How do we do? I should
Why don't
read
you
out all the
say,
questions.
should I answer that one or should other people join that one?
Okay, maybe I read out all the questions and then we now answer them. Okay, the first question I have read out is how can we improve the coordination and integration between different levels of government and non-governmental organizations in disaster response? The second question is what measures have been implemented to enhance the early warning systems? What actions have been taken? The third one is how often do national hazards change? How often do national hazards change? Do they remain constant for long periods of time? Or is there no pattern to how they change? How severe are the changes in 2025? That's a very good question and a very brilliant, I think we need to scratch our head together. The fourth question is, what are the challenges of NDRA in addressing potential hazards in Gambia? I think this is for Miss Sani here. Then the last question is, between natural hazards and human-induced hazards, which has the higher occurrence rate in Nigeria as of today and why? I don't know if our panelists and Adam were able to get the 5 questions.
Okay, I think for me, sorry, I've already typed my answers because I was going through the answers questions. So I already typed and sent them to the question and answer page already. The concerns that they were raising. Yeah. I've already submitted my answers.
I'm happy to come in on the first one and the third one, if you'd like, Professor.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first one was about how to ensure coordination across national and international and private sector and NGOs. I don't think there is a magic answer. I'm sorry to say, I don't think there is, a potion we can take to make it happen. I think, though, that we need to recognize that everyone has a similar objective. The NGOs, the private sector, the government, all are interested in reducing impact and reducing risk. So I think when we have a common goal, we have a common objective, it should be easier to make those coordinations of actions more coherent. I think it requires that coordination, though. It requires somebody to take the reins, take control, and force everybody to acknowledge these things in the same room. And I think that's the role of the government in most cases. On the second one, I think it's a really interesting one about how hazards change. And maybe this is a difficult one because in most cases, hazards don't change very much. Zones that are earthquake prone do not become not earthquake prone suddenly. This is a process of millions of years with volcanoes, with floodplains. River valleys flood. That's where water goes. So a lot of those things are fairly standard. What we're seeing though is changes in things related to meteorology. So heat waves, cold waves, droughts, those things are starting to change a little bit more as the effects of climate change are changing the way that our planet behaves. I think another dimension, though, and this is one that I think will be very common, especially in West Africa, is around the concept of changing exposure. We have urbanization in West Africa that's happening at extremely fast rates. Ghana, for example, has been growing at something like 11% per year, their GDP. That means that the city of Accra is completely different from what it looked like 10 years ago. Like 100% it is different, which means that the way that hazards interact with that many new people, that many new cars, that many new systems is very different. And in a way, it's not the hazards that are changing, it's us. We're changing the way we behave in the environment, and the hazards are affecting us in different ways because we're putting ourselves in the line of fire more directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Dr. Onye, would you have any contribution to make, or Ms. Mbasa? You said you sent your answers to the kingdom, but it would be nice to let us know what your response is, especially to the question of what are the challenges of NDRA in addressing potential hazards in Gambia.
Yeah, already before that, I just wanted to also add on my voice to this question that says, how can we improve the coordination and integration between different levels of government, from national, regional to local and NGOs? At NDMA, what we did is we have like different committees, as I mentioned in the presentation. From the national level, we have the governing council. That's the ministers, where the vice president and the minister sits. But notwithstanding, at regional level also, we have our governors and mayors who are the chairs of the disaster management committees. And then at that regional level also, we have established a committee called Regional Disaster Management Committees that comprises of all government officials working within that region, be it the NGO, the private sector. They are all part of that committee where they sit and then discuss on disasters relating to that region, all government agencies and NGOs within that region. And at district level, we have the chiefs that are the head of the disasters in that district. And then in that district also, we have established a district disaster management committees that help us to also coordinate disaster issues at district level. And then at village level also, we have the alcalde. So we have that change that is helping us. That's why sometimes even when disaster happens in a village, before the regional coordinator from the governor's office at regional level get the information, it's the village committee members that will conduct the assessment because they are trained, and then inform the regional disaster coordinator about the incident that is happening. That's where also at regional level, they will also call on an emergency meeting with the governor or the mayor being the chair, and then other government officials to see, and then how are they going to respond on that disaster that is reported within a village or within a community. That's how we do our coordination at the national disaster management level. So the some of the challenges we have, especially when it comes to urban, we have a problem of poor drainage system that we have. Waste management is a challenge because all these things are happening. For example, when it rains heavily, the capacity of the drainage that we have, they are very small. So the water will not be able to contain. So at the end of the day, it will be, the water will be spreading into communities, and then compounds will be flooded. And then we also have this rapid development also. People are leaving the rural areas, coming to the urban area. It's a challenge. And then when they come also, settlement is a problem. For anybody, whoever comes in, you want to settle anyhow in the community. So some will be settling on waterways that will cause flooding every year. And then when we conduct assessment this year, and we realize that the same thing happens, people are coming up from the rural areas to the urban areas, and they are occupying the waterways where the water should flow to get to the streams or to the rivers. So those are some of the challenges also we are challenged with. and then also increase frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. That's the climate change issue. That is also affecting us. And it's a challenge to the agency and it's a challenge to the government. So far, I think those are some of the things that I wanted to answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Briefly, before we round off, in 1 minute, Dr. Onyebu, can you answer that question that said, between natural hazards and human-induced hazards, which has the highest occurrence rate in Nigeria as of today, and why? We just have 1 minute for you to do that, and then we'll go over to the course tutorial. Just 1 minute. Natural hazards and human-induced.
Very quickly, let me start by saying that we do not have natural disasters. We have natural hazard. Now, if you're saying natural hazard and man-made hazard, which of them occurs more frequently, I will tell you it is natural hazard. Because the man-made hazard like civil unrest does not occur all the time. What occurs most is the natural hazard.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a natural that has a higher occurrence rate in Nigeria. We are specific now, Nigeria.
In Nigeria, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contributions. The panel has been quite enriching. I'll hand over to Lauren to continue with the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much to Iwoma and the guest speakers. This again was a very enriching discussion. We will now show you a very brief tutorial on how to access the UNITAR and UNDRR Words into Action course. Here, this will show you how you can access the course and get a certificate of completion. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. I will now pass the floor for our closing remarks from Dr. Christopher Belford from the CIFAL Banjul.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Iwoma. We want to thank our speakers. They've done justice to what they've been asked to do. I have keenly sat down and enjoyed this impactful, interesting, and very thought-provoking session. And I'm sure our participants also have got a good time in listening to the presentation from Madam Marcy Sane and Dr. William, Professor William. And I'm very sure that we've gone past the time, but I'm very sure that this was a very useful session. And I'll encourage all participants to make use of the material. The material is available. And if possible, Lauren, if you can share with us the video or audio of this presentation so that we can also share with them so that they can have access. We thank all of you and we're very grateful to all of you. And we look forward that this will be an ongoing conversation. The conversation will not only stop here, but would continue. Let me also thank Adam Fisher. I will not be doing justice if I don't thank him. I think that will be a serious omission on my part if I don't thank him for his presentation, his guidance throughout the planning stage of this meeting. We thank you most profusely, Mr. Fisher, for your guidance and your expertise in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Belford. And with that, that is the conclusion of our first Words into Action session. If you'd like to continue the discussion, you may keep in contact with the CIFAL Nigeria, CIFAL by Banjul, UNITAR, and UNDRR. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.